The Western Church has a story problem. Because story lies at the heart of Christianity, this problem represents an existential crisis. Yet few are even aware that a crisis exists. Put simply, we do not understand how stories work. We neither study nor teach the language of story, nor do we recognize the foundational truths embedded in its grammar. We don't appreciate the role story plays in human development, and we barely acknowledge its importance to the shaping of culture. Somehow, the Church has forgotten what we once almost took for granted, that life is a story. If life is a story, it can only be rightly understood in story terms. But how are we to understand those terms when we consistently disregard and devalue them? American evangelicals in particular have largely abandoned the arts. Our sermons, community dramas, religious novels, and Christian films often reject subtlety in narration and instead mount an assault on the rational mind that is direct, clear, and lifeless. Consequently, our attempts to use the language of story as a delivery mechanism for the gospel have about as much emotional impact as a doctor's needle. Rather than pursuing Thomas Aquinas's coherence of beauty, goodness, and truth, our storytellers project sterile, propositional truths stripped of goodness and beauty. Such stories are virtually useless when it comes to conveying the gospel of Christ to the culture. Furthermore, our naive approach to story as a needle and serum delivery mechanism of two components, story and message, leaves us vulnerable to the subtle manipulation of certain non-Christian storytellers who are quite adept at utilizing narratives to persuade, manipulate, and control. Ever on the lookout for toxic injections of bad messaging, we inflate the danger of movies and books with a transparent political agenda while overlooking the more insidious content that can subtly reshape an audience's worldview through a deft use of ideals, moral standards. Somehow, we've forgotten that the serpent was more crafty than the other creatures. See Genesis chapter 3, verse 1. Maybe the worst thing about our failure to learn and to teach the language of story is that we don't understand our own scriptures. The Bible isn't written in just Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. It's also written in story. Its layered narratives, metaphors, and poetic images are endlessly rich. Its structures and arcs and dramatic connections profoundly meaningful. They are indeed treasures worth seeking. See Matthew chapter 13, verse 52. But unless we learn to see the scriptures through this lens, unless we humble ourselves as little children begging for a story,